Industry news, machine reviews, interviews, and a lot more right here on the WELD Like BAZZA podcast.
Hello and welcome along to episode 1 of the WELD Like BAZZA podcast. My name's Barry Steele and this show is exclusively sponsored by MS Welding. So I wanted to record this as a video stroke audio podcast and I was going to do that yesterday. Today is the 7th of January, so it's a Sunday when I'm recording this and we're hopefully going to get this out to listen to for everybody tomorrow or later on this week. And it's really funny because last night I was working on some reconditioned machines that I'm currently putting through the workshops and I had to carry out some repairs on some circuit boards. I was looking for some particular components and it would appear that Dad's still having a bit of a chuckle at me and he's been putting these electronic components in different boxes or hiding them in different places of the workshop this last year. So now that he's not here to tell me where he's put them, I'm ransacking the workshop right up until, well, it was 10 p.m. when I left. 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. I left the workshop last night after looking for components and working on some PCBs that I'm currently working on for some reconditioned welding machines. So thanks for that, Dad. Greatly appreciated. Saturday night, I left work at, well, it was about 10. I think it was about 11:30 when I went up to bed after picking up a curry on the way home. So that's my healthy living New Year's start straight out the window. But you know, it's not as bad as it could have been. So today I did go back into the workshop and it was predominantly just to put a couple of boards on the test rig, make sure that the test rig was working properly. And I was going to set to and record the podcast with the camera and the audio. And I just thought to myself, potentially the best way to do this, because I know so many engineers and sales reps and other people regarding and within the welding industry that travel up and down that motorway, might be a really good opportunity to do the audio version first. Let's get this audio version out there. People can listen when they're in the car, on the bike, in the gym, or whatever they want to do. And I can get my point across to everybody. And maybe we'll do the video ones when we get special guests in. And we have got some special guests booked in. One of them actually is Tuesday this week. We're going to be speaking to my good friend Callum from EWM UK. So that's something to look forward to. But this one, you're going to have to listen to my ramblings. And I really want to talk today about something that got brought up over Christmas by my uncle, who's a very well-educated human. And in a conversation, he turned around and went, you know what, although I know that you've worked for your dad your entire life, and I know what your dad's had his own business for 38 years, I still don't actually know what you do. And that coincides with a question and an answer that crops up in conversations with customers sometimes. Quite a few customers will say, well, do you know, I actually never knew that you did that. So I thought, right, let's start by telling everybody exactly who I am, how I became who I am in the welding industry, and where we're going. So ultimately, my name's Barry, and I'm the son of Malcolm, who sadly, and it's still so emotional, but Dad passed away last year. Now, how I became an engineer in the welding industry is, I was, probably still am if I put some time into it, but I was an incredibly talented musician. But my dad was very old school. So my dad said, you always need a backup plan. And my backup plan was going to be, I was going to go work for the business, going to go work for the family business. And I did. It's not that that was my only option. My work experience, I went to work at an audio electronics company in Leeds. I did that, and that was really enjoyable. I spent 3 weeks there. You know, I know that my son's work experience is going to be 5 days this year. My work experience was 3 weeks. And rather than take the easy route and just go work with Dad, which I was doing anyway, I went to work for an audio electronics company. And the size of the company, you know, they put the sound system into the Sheffield Arena when it was called the Sheffield Arena. And, you know, I got offered a job, you know, when I left school and said, if you want to come back and have a job with us, you know, you're more than welcome to come back. And I just thought, that particular environment wasn't for me. I didn't really kind of click with the guy that owned the business. I'm not saying he was a bad person. He was actually really great. But me and him, our personalities just didn't get on. Now, everybody that does know me will also know that me and Dad didn't always get on either. That's because we were both very alike. And Dad used to love to talk. Now, Dad would talk to everybody on the phone. Dad would never pick up a microphone. Whereas I will talk to absolutely anybody down the microphone. I think it's a fantastic medium. And there was one particular year in the summer holidays, Dad had a really big order for some meter kits, analog meter kits to go onto Lincoln FCRs and Kemp RA 450s, stuff like that. Some machines that didn't have meters, and it would be a harder job to fit meters into the machines. So particular companies bought meter kits, and they were analog. You could either buy an AC/DC version, which would be used for a TIG welder, or you could buy a DC-only version, which predominantly would be used on a MIG welder. And I remember my particular job this summer was building 50 of these meter kits, and that's what I did from start to finish. So I went with my dad in the van, or one of the lads at the time, and we collected all the steelwork. And then my job was, fitting all the meters, building the wiring looms, putting the shunts in there, testing them. My dad had made a variac so we could do the voltage test and calibration. And then we also did a load test, and some of the meters were for like sub-arc systems, so they had a 1500 amp meter in them for the amps. And what we'd do is we'd calibrate them, and Dad had a transformer built, very low voltage, only 2 volts or 1 volt, but it gave out up to 1500 amps or 1600 amps. So we used to calibrate the amp meters as well. And it was a great summer holiday experience in some ways. A lot of my friends were like messing about, getting drunk in the park, riding the bikes, getting lost, dicking about in the woods. I was at work with my dad and the rest of the team then. Dad had quite a big team of employees, and I was building these meter kits. I was testing them and putting the lids on them, putting the stickers on them, wrapping them up, and they were getting shipped out to client. And I always thought that was a brilliant summer holiday, but I had an idea behind it. And as a kid growing up from the age of, I think about 4 or 5, I was a drummer, an incredibly good drummer towards the end. And that started from my nana buying me a drum kit, potentially to annoy me dad. So I used to play my drum kit to annoy my dad as a kid, and Dad was like, actually, he's quite good. And my dad bought me more drum kits and loads of lessons, and I played with bands all over the world. Literally, I've drummed all over the world. By the time I was 16, I'd done something like 28 West End shows. And Dad always said, music is brilliant and you're fantastic and I'll support you every way, which I can, but you need a backup plan. And I'm only going to support you really if you have a secondary backup plan. You're not going to be a drummer forever. And I obviously went into the family business after leaving school, and that just took over. It became the only way, the only thing that we did, the only thing that we had time for, because the business was so busy, and potentially just took over absolutely everything that we did. That's not a bad thing. In some ways, it's not a great thing, but it's how it is. So I left school and Dad says, right, we need to get you enrolled on a college course. He started looking around and realising that there just wasn't the course or the college courses set up for engineers like there used to be in the 70s, in the 60s. And he phoned the Leeds College of Technology at the time and spoke to a guy who was actually one of his tutors when he went to college as an apprentice. And he spoke to this particular chap and he went, you phoned at just the right time. I've just designed a very particular and specialist engineering course for some apprentices. He says, now, they're coming from Vickers, and Vickers had a tank factory. That was in Leeds. And they built tanks, Ministry of Defence tanks. And he said, but obviously I know you and I know your calibre. I'm more than happy to put Barry with the guys from Vickers and push him through. He said, but those are here 4 days a week. And my dad turned around and went, well, but Barry can't be there 4 days a week. I need him here earning money. And anybody that knows me dad will laugh when I tell you that. So he said, okay, well, he can come one day and one night, but he's only got the same amount of time to get through all the work and all the requirements as the guys from Vickers have doing 4 days a week. So my dad was like, oh yeah, that's fine. He'll be fine with that. Cheers, Dad, for that. I'll never forget that. But what's really funny is I made some really good friends, and it was a good laugh. It was really, really good. And it was still full of old school teaching engineers that get stuck in the milling machines with you, get stuck into the lathes and get stuck into the drawing stuff with you. And so it was good. I had a massive broad-based kind of education, and I really enjoyed it. It was good. And then I finished my first 2 years, and I went and learned electronics and electrical at East Street in Leeds, and that wasn't as much fun. I think I spent 1 day a week at East Street, and I spent 1 day a week in the Leeds City Centre, and it just wasn't as much fun. I loved it, like the electronic side of it and the fault finding, but I wasn't with the same team of lads. I was with a broad-based kind of team of people, and it just didn't seem as good. But I came out of my apprenticeship, and that's pretty much when the learning started. And I remember passing my driving test, and Dad was like, right, that's it, you're out in the van. And I was like, what? I can't even drive. I've only just passed my driving test. And it was like, yep, that's it now. You're out on the road. And I remember phone calls had come in, and you got to imagine that I've been at work 3 years. I've not really done much other than what I've done in the workshop with my dad and the other lads that worked there at the time. And all of a sudden, I'm out in the van, passed my driving test. Right, that's it. You're gonna get yourself out there. And he once sent me to Shawco Trench Systems, which were that were quite a good company of my dad's, and we used to go there quite often. And I was working on a Lincoln FCR 650, I think. I think the rheostat had burnt out. And I remember working on that, and the place was absolutely horrific. Wet ground, horrible environment, just dusty environment. The machine never got blew out, never got looked after. And I remember coming back thinking, just what am I doing? And I had this vision of sitting behind my drum kit in a recording studio where it was like 22 degrees, and the lead singer of the band was probably drunk in the control room, and I just recorded all the drum tracks. And then I looked at my Citroen van and my toolbox, and the fact that my boots were already black from all the crap that I'd walked in that particular day. And I thought, well, do you know what? I do need a backup plan. Dad said I need a backup plan. And it wasn't long after that Dad became ill with one of his first ever illnesses, which was pernicious anemia. And I remember the day that Dennis Stagg came down from, at that time it would have been Pennine AB, and pretty much gave me Dad a really big telling off. I said, listen, I've spoke to Diane, which is my mum, my dad's wife, and I'm telling you now, Malcolm, get yourself to doctors. Something is not right. And my dad were like, it's stress. And Dennis were like, do you want me to take you to doctors? Dennis left, and my dad did go to doctors, and my dad was diagnosed with pernicious anemia. And pretty much everything changed on the entire timeline from that point on, because I had no time for drumming with bands. I had no point in trying to pursue that because I was so busy at work trying to take the strain, look after Dad, be a great son, be a great employee. And that brings me to now. 30 years on from when I started, when I was 14, working for Dad in the school holidays, to now looking after the business because he passed away far too soon earlier last year. So that's how I became the engineer that I am today. And it leads me on to the next story of, and I know you're going to love it, you're going to love to listen to this story of how we became so involved with high technology welding equipment. And if somebody asks who I am and what I do, I always tell them, yeah, I am an engineer, but I'm a welding solutions provider. And that means I've probably got somewhere in my arsenal of knowledge, which has been passed down from Dad, and all the other training and help that I've had throughout the years to solve your problems. That might not just be in repairing and servicing your welding machine or your cutting machine. You might have a plasma cutter or a CNC cutting machine. But that also means down to the consumables to use or the best approach for building an automatic machine, an automation machine, or the best approach for streamlining a particular process or helping you with the best technology. And it comes from a few years further on from where we've just been talking about Dad getting diagnosed with pernicious anemia, to me going out on a service contract to a company it was in Bingley. And it was a very old school business. And although they did everything right, and, they did absolutely everything right, they were definitely behind the times in a lot of ways. That business went on to getting bought out because of a particular product it built was a product that somebody wanted, and they bought the entire company for that product. But I remember going there as an engineer to service all their welding equipment. And this place was that old school that welders that worked there never wanted to move their welding machines from the welding bay. They never wanted to change a welding bay, never mind welding machines. So what you'd find is desks and benches and cabinets kind of got put in place around the welders. And I remember going out, I think it was the first ever time I'd been on site to service everything within a week. I think they had about 40 machines. It was a full service, so that means getting the machines pulled out, taking them outside, giving them a good blowout in the open environment, then vacuuming them out, anything that's left to vac out, getting them all put together, giving them a calibration, giving them a test, and making sure that they're safe to use, and fitting anything that they needed. Cables, Dix plugs, Dix sockets, inlet guides, spool holders, spool boxes, and making a note of any repairs needed. Because although these companies were really great, the guys never reported anything that was potentially wrong with the machines. And you go year after and you'd be going, that needs sorting. Oh, it's been like that for years. It's always been like that. I don't touch that knob anyway. It's fine. And that's the kind of environment that we was working in. And I remember on this first service, there was a machine, and I can't remember if it was an FCR. I'm sure it was a Miller Syncrowave 300 BP. Massive brute of a machine. And I mean, massive in the way that if you needed to transport that machine, you needed a crane and a banksman and a fork truck and a flatback to move it, because it was so big. You couldn't get it in like a little van like we had at that time at MS. But because these guys were so set in the ways, and their welding bay was in a particular way and a particular shape and form and style, and nothing got moved for 25 years, they built things around things which were already in the bays. So this particular bay had a bench welded around the welding machine, which meant that I couldn't get to the welding machine to service it. But it had a problem on this particular service. I think it was the HF capacitors that let go. So we was going to put a complete new digital HF in. And it's funny because I remember spending 3 hours with a 9-inch grinder cutting away the bench so I could get the machine away from the wall, because they built this bench around it. So after doing that, I realised that the machine wasn't on a trolley. And if you're familiar with the Miller Syncrowave 300, the old one, some people put casters on them, but they were like big 6 and 8 inch casters that were massive. And some people put them in like a bespoke trolley, which had like a wheel cart handle on at one side, and you could pull it with some big wheels. And that was great. This one didn't have the trolley or the casters. And I needed to get it pulled away from the wall so I could get in to see. Well, I'm already 3 hours into my day, maybe 4 by this time, looking for a piece of bar big enough to be able to get down the back and itch it away an inch at a time from the wall. It wasn't too bad. At this time, I was in the gym every other single day of the week. it wasn't too bad. Well, it was, because these machines were absolute dinosaurs then, never mind now. And I finally got it away from the wall enough. And I remember putting my hand down the back. And this is in the days when we didn't have gloves on all the time. I do wear gloves 95% of the time now. And I didn't have gloves then. And I was feeling down the back and I felt something a bit squishy down the back of this Miller machine. And I thought, that don't feel great. And then I managed to pull it away from the wall a little bit further. And when I had a look down the back, there was a half-eaten dead rat, the size of a domesticated cat, down the back of this machine. And I gipped a few times. I remember gipping and thinking, what am I doing? And that vision of being in a Miami recording studio with my drum kit and the band and the recording engineers and the manager and probably all the girls that go along with it at that time as well, just came flooding back to me as I looked at myself in a pair of red overalls. And you couldn't tell they were red because they were covered in that much grease, because I'd done nothing but cut benches away so I could get to machines all week. Anyway, long story short, I got the machine sorted. I isolated it from the mains, ripped all the HF board out, and I went back the week after and we fitted a digital HF unit. But I remember going back to my dad that night and he went, "What's up with you?" It was about 7 o'clock at night. I left at 7 o'clock in the morning. And we're like, "I'll tell you what's wrong with me." And I told him this entire story and he just laughed as if that was normal life. And I guess it was. Do you know what? I guess it was normal life back then, to pull out a millisync wave and find a half-eaten dead rat down the back of it. And it'd probably been eaten by another dead rat. But he just laughed. He was like, "Well, it's how it is." And I turned around to him and I said, if this is all I've got to do, if this is the extent of how good it gets, I don't think this job's for me. And unless we start selling something new and something top end and better than everything else on the market, then do you know what? I'm going to go pursue that dream. You know, with a backup plan or not, I'm going. And I don't think it was long either before that or after that we'd had a conversation with Alan from EWM, and that's before EWM even had a holding depot up in Morpeth. And it kind of set us up as a distributor and a service centre, and we started moving EWM stuff after that. Don't get me wrong, we had access to other welding machines at that point, but people just got into this price war and would sell for the least rather than upselling and selling for what the machine was worth, with a service package and a helping package and buying into the relationship of the supplier. People had just started knocking hundreds of pounds off list prices and offer prices just to win sales. And that's how I think that's how the welding machine market went at that point. So when we took EWM on, in some cases, they were like twice the price of an equivalent machine. But it wasn't equivalent, because EWM, even then and now, in my own very opinion, and in most situations, I would say are one of the, if not the best welding machine and welding machine manufacturer that you could buy into. And Dad always used to laugh that if I got run over in the street and he chopped me down the middle, it'd say EWM in the middle and it'd probably say hypotherm at the other side. And Dad made this big joke about it, and I'll never forget. He used to tell customers all the time. But it's true. You know, I am incredibly dedicated to the high-end EWM product purely because of that day of finding that rat. But the funny side of it is, and everybody that knows me in the industry knows that me and Oliver's mum and aunt together haven't been for very, very, very many years. But me and Oliver's mum still have a little bit of a laugh about that rat. And we still talk about that rat on that day. And she actually called it Daddy Rat. She gave it a little bit of a nickname. And she said that she imagined it having a leather jacket on and trying to sell me watches from inside its leather jacket. And that is the story of how we became ultimately the welding solution provider, selling high technology welding equipment into markets that potentially had never even contemplated buying an expensive piece of welding equipment. And I remember my first ever car costing, I think it cost $5,000. Some of the top of the range EWM MIG welders now, list price, depending on the package that you put together, are up to like £14,000 and £15,000. I'm not saying every EWM machine is £14,000 and £15,000, but if you look at the price and the list price of the EWM machines, they are up there. You can check that out on the EWM website. But that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, as you're driving down the motorway today, heading to your next customer, you can just imagine young Barry, balls big enough to come in a dump truck, as they used to say, in his red overalls that you can't tell are red because he's been grinding desks and benches and filing cabinets away from welding machines all week just so he can service them. And that's how our very, very, very close relationship with EWM became. Hopefully, you've now got a little bit more of an understanding about how I've got to where I am. The only other thing that you need to know is why an audio podcast. At 14 years old, I was representing my school, broadcasting on community, and I think the other radio station was a Christian radio station. I was broadcasting and representing the school that I went to as a DJ on community radio, as well as being a drummer and drumming all over. So I was very involved in this kind of business. And since then, I've worked on Galaxy 105, Kiss FM, Sky Radio, Sky FM. I've worked on a lot of places as a part-time hobby, as a part-time interest. So I think moving forward, the audio podcast is going to be a fantastic way to get to know me, get to listen to the people that I want to talk to, and enjoy spending time with BAZZA on the WELD Like BAZZA podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm going to try and get another episode out for next week. If not, it's only going to be a week away. And I hope to see you on the next podcast soon. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.
The WELD Like BAZZA podcast is sponsored by MS Welding, the #1 welding solution provider. mswelding.co.uk